Hi guys, welcome to another full painting tutorial, and this is one that I really like. It's festive and I really want to share it. But I really want to dedicate this to the retirement centers and the elder care facilities because the elder community right now is very much at risk. They're isolated, and if our wonderful senior citizens would love to paint and enjoy this, I would be so delighted. If you can't, maybe you can get a family member to paint this for you and you can watch this tutorial and maybe even dialogue together at the same time. Anyway, this is dedicated to you. And I will add that this is the third painting in my Christmas song painting series. I've already done Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Silver Bells, and this one is We Wish You a Merry Christmas. To begin, we have to know where we're going to put our little squirrels, and I do know I want two of them on opposite corners, and I do want them in different positions. I need to think about how I'm going to sketch them out, and I do those little tiny sketches with a TerraCotta colored pencil. I just like the color. And then after I, sketch and resketch a little bit, you can see that I've drawn a lot of lines there. Then I do the final line with a micron pen, which is permanent. And then those lines will be transferred to the canvas with a carbon or a graphite paper. So we need to have, this is a circle, and this is kind of a wedge shape, and then we'll add the contours later. So, and oh, by the way, you'll need to get your canvas size figured out. So mine is 9.5 by 9.5 inches about. So I don't want a huge squirrel in the middle of this 9.5. So my squirrel is going to be roughly a little bit less than 3 inches. So I'll put that right here, and maybe that's pretty close to 3 inches. So when I do my little sketch, I need to have a little extra here for the nose. So I'll have maybe a circle, just so, a little bit larger. And I'm going to have my wedge shape, something like that. And now I'm going to think about, and I want the angle of the nose to be up, so I'm going to turn it up, because you'll see right here that the squirrel is going to be looking at his brother squirrel, who's a little bit of a mischief maker, and he's going to be a little bit in awe, so let's make that mouth cute. So he's going to have his nose turned up, and we're going to come down with a little swoop, in and out, a little bit of a pucker of a lip there, coming down, and this is where he flares a little bit. He comes down, and maybe his belly gets a little bit round. We can manipulate that later. Now this head will come down. Let's make it a little bit flatter here on the top. And I want this to smooth. Ooh, that looks like a seal. And we're going to have a little fatter body right here. Oh, right there is contour coming down. Got to give him a little bit of a butt. And I want to come in a little bit more, maybe. It's harder when I'm under camera. Okay, there we go. And now we want this. Well, let's do the lower leg first. So we don't want him positioned so he's facing this way. So that's why I move this leg here over here. So we're not going to see the far leg. We'll just see this curve, which is really easy for us. Oh, that's pretty good. And now we're going to have, maybe halfway in here, we'll have his little arm coming through. And now we'll do his eye. The eye is a little bit almond shaped, but flatter at the bottom. So you can do a circle right here, and then make it flat and almond shape. And that's too flat. Okay. And I want his nose to be a little bit less. Okay, and now we have to do little circle ears. So you have one circle here and one circle here, and then rather than make it curve this way, because if you do that means his head is down. So we're going to have to curve it over like his head is at a tilt. And we'll do the same for this one. His head is at a tilt. Okay, and that is pretty much how we're going to do this. Now I'm going to take my micron pen and trace over and get the shape that I want. And I want him to be a little bit fatter here. Yes, that's better. And put a little bit more slimness and then a little punch there. A little paunch. And yes. Okay. And then my squirrel tail is going to come up like this. And we don't have to draw that right now. We'll just ad-lib with that later. But you just have to have the idea there's going to be a gap here for the squirrel tail. And once we do our wreath around here, then we'll figure out how we're going to position that tail. Now let's do the top buddy with all of that expression in his face. His size is about 2 inches, but that's including the ears. So let's put some marks down. And right here, so we have the ears are going to be somewhere here. So his head is going to be a little bit round. And we do know it's a little bit, maybe a little bit more oblong or oval shaped. Okay. And let's make this round for now. Oh yeah, that's pretty good. And let's work on that face. We want it a little bit slimmer. A little flat on the top. And right here out of the side, you have a little bit of a maybe flat area here. You're going to put your ears at a triangle and make them curved. At a triangle and make them curved. Oh, it's kind of a cute ear too. So you'll see mine's a little bit more rounded. This one's like straighter. You know, put personality. Now my the round circle on the under part is off, so I'm going to circle it, make a circle there. And we'll do a great big kind of a little bit diamond shape here. And this will come down, up, down, up. Maybe it's like a butterfly wing, I guess. Then you have to think about his side. So out of the side of the ear, you're going to maybe put it at an angle and just put a curve. That's for his hip. Or maybe even make his body a little bit smaller. And this might be a little bit of a shoulder curve. You know, you can fix it later when you're holding the paintbrush. It'll make a big difference. And we'll put the little paw coming out there. You don't have to do anything. It does need to get narrower because his arm will get really slim at kind of like we call it the wrist. I guess we call it the wrist. Now I'll want my gingerbread man. There you go. And your gingerbread man right here, it's lined up like here's your line and here's your cross. That's where you line up your gingerbread man. And you can fix, you know, gingerbread men can be all kinds of shapes. That's not a problem. Oh, let's get our eye. Here, it's a triangle with a little bit of a bulge. So we'll do it like here, triangle with a bulge, and triangle with a bulge. Yeah, there we go. Now, a lot of how angry or smart looking or whatever depends on where the colors you choose, where you put the shadows. So we'll worry about that part later. So right now, this is just a quick image. And then, of course, you'll need out of the bottom, you'll have his little leg coming down. And again, it's tapered. So his leg will come down here. So now you know how to draw. So let's get his ears in. And maybe you want to make it Like mine is, the nose or snout is closer together. That'll work. Now because this is at an angle, you don't want really long legs. You want shorter legs. It'll be cuter because the gingerbread is on a plane at an angle. So you're not looking at it straight on, so it's not going to be really wide. It's going to be quite narrow. There you go. There's our little gingerbread man. And I want his body a little bit smaller. There you go. We will not be doing anything about the legs, the feet, they're hard, and we will just get our little guy transferred now. So right now we need to get in the outline of where we're going to paint. So I just need a little bit of light color down, and then as soon as we know where we're going to paint for the outline, we can add more color. So I want this guy to kind of sit on the top and this little squirrel to be inside of the loop. So I might have I haven't decided yet. I'll figure it out as I paint. And stepping away, and this needs to be a little bit further out. Good. There we go. So now I know where my wreath is going to be, and I will figure out the shapes as I go along, as we go along. So we will just have just a lot of spontaneity in this one. So do I want a wreath that has twigs? Yes, I do. So I'm going to paint in a twig here. I'll leave some gaps for some kind of foliage. Don't want to paint over everything. And I have the outline. Do I want to do more now? I think I'll save it. So I can always add more stems later. And if I don't like something, I can wipe it up now if I want to change it. And I think I don't want to put in my lines here just yet because I want more foliage there, and I don't want the foliage to show lines underneath if I do really light foliage. And the same goes for over here. It's just water. And because I have a nice paint surface down there, it comes up really quickly and easily. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so I have my idea where I'm going to be painting now. And by the way, I'm using a 1/2 inch flat brush. It's quite thick, it holds a lot of water, and I just love this brush. It's Hwaeong, which is a Korean brand, but you can find something comparable. This brush is great for getting those textures, especially with the pine needles. Each layer I put down with the pine needles, I use a different color. I blend it up, and that's why I'm constantly going back to the blending plate. Each of the top layers is a little bit darker. Maybe it has more blue in it. This one definitely has a little bit more blue. And I'm not keeping those pine needles parallel. I'm moving the brush slightly back and forth, back and forth. I'm giving this a little, kind of more like a realistic texture. It's actually really fun. I noticed that when I was laying down my pine needle, the flat of the brush, somehow it's not straight. And this particular brush, it's very flexible. It's not like a really tough or stiff bristle. So it's actually adding more texture than I intended, which I love. And right now I'm envisioning where that squirrel is going to be, and so I took a little bit of that pine needle up, just kind of blurred it out because maybe I want to add more texture there, or the squirrel's tail. I'm not sure, but I can always add those pine needles later. Okay, it's now time to add the poinsettias. And my first layer of the poinsettia I decided to make a little bit darker, and I'm going to put the red on the top. So this is a lot of purples. I'm mixing the cobalt and the carmine and a lot of water. And for almost every single petal I add a little bit of a different mixture just because it gives more character to the flower. I did realize that because this is my first layer, I probably should have been a little bit darker, but maybe not. And remember that poinsettias all have pointed little leaves, so I'm adding some little points. On the second poinsettia, I made the colors a little bit more vibrant, and I like the shape much better. Eventually I'm going to add, I'm going to thicken them because poinsettias oftentimes, not always, have very wide leaves or petals. I don't think they're petals. I think that's actually the leaf of the plant. But again, I've mixed the cobalt with the red to kind of give it that little bit of purplish look. You'll see me adding white to those leaves. I'm adding white to the edge because I want each of the petals of the leaves to be distinguished from the other. Now some can blur together, but really the top ones need to stand out against the ones underneath. And on this second poinsettia right now, I'm trying to make them stand out. I realized I had made the petals or leaves too purple, and I was having a hard time making the color bright again. So I painted white on top of some of the top leaves, and then I added the red on top, and that's how I popped the color. And it also distinguished those petals from the background, and I was able to add a little bit of white to some of the edging, and actually it looks pretty good, I think. Much better than the top poinsettia. But eventually, when I get the little poinsettia, the centers in, they will both look really attractive. My opinion. One thing about it, when you're painting, of course, you're going to have some ugly stages. Sometimes you're not going to like a picture and you're going to want to throw it away. Don't give up. Just have fun. You can do something to redeem it. If you can't, well, chalk it up as a learning experience. But that top poinsettia, as I was painting it, I was getting really frustrated with it because I just couldn't get the shape. I wanted it to be at an angle, not, I didn't want both of the poinsettias to be like full in my face. I wanted one to be more at an angle just to give it a little bit more diversity. But I just wasn't getting it. It took a lot of time, and I just had to keep popping the colors. Eventually, when I get the centers in them, you will see that they look pretty good, even that top one. Right now I'm adding a bunch of leaves, and I have two basic philosophies about that. One is about the color, how I choose the color, and one is about the shape. So I'm trying to keep maybe the larger ones a certain color and the smaller ones another color and another shape, of course. So it's kind of like a harmony in the picture by color and shape. I'm also only using 4 colors, very limited, to make those leaves. So I'm using phthalo green, that's kind of the bright green, but I'm not using 100% phthalo green, ever. It's just too bright. So I'll mix it with maybe the blues or a lot of the yellow ochre. I might put in a touch of burnt sienna, and those are the 4 colors I use for the leaves. I do like using a lot of the cobalt just because it looks great against that red, and it looks really nice with the yellow ochre too. And cobalt mixes well to make a teal, so I'm having fun with these leaves. I'm not exactly planning on where to put anything. I'm just putting the leaves down when I think it needs to be and trying to put, yellows against greens and yellows against blues and just to vary it up. I do notice right now that I need to up my contrast, but that's what the end is for. Just before you publish something, you check about your white balances, or did you retain enough white? Do you have enough of the contrast? So it's just a painting journey as you go. So don't worry about your composition so much. Just put different textures next to each other and different colors, and try to leave some empty space. Leave some space for the eye to rest, otherwise it gets too busy. And again, I'm putting in some more of those pine needles, and this is with more of the blue on top of that green pine needle underneath. And like I said, I'm adding different textures, and those pine needles are kind of cool textured. It's nice just to have hints of them here and there. I think I could paint a whole picture with those pine needles. They're just really cool to paint. You'll also notice as I'm painting, I'm trying to still keep a tiny frame around the edge of the picture. I am not painting all the way to the edge of the picture. I think I did in a couple spots, on the poinsettia leaves, but for the most part, I'm leaving that just a little framing around my other picture, my wreath. And that way my picture is still framed nicely. It's not just too much or too busy. And this color right here is really pretty. I think it's just cobalt and some yellow ochre. I'm sorry, it's phthalo green and yellow ochre. It's really kind of a, I don't know, a spring green, but it has a little bit of olive to it too. It's nice. Okay, so I'm pretty much finished adding in the foliage. So now I can darken in what's left of the wreath, what is still exposed. So I think this is burnt sienna with a little bit of water. And the second time around, I add a little bit of the phthalo green and yellow ochre just to give it a different color. And now I'm adding another stem around the original. This other stem is going to be even yet a different color with a little bit more burnt sienna, and maybe there was a touch of cobalt in it, just to give it a little bit of a darker tone. And I want these three stems to kind of wrap around and entwine each other, just to give it a bit of, I don't know, make it look nice. I just showed you that I'm using a size 8 flat brush, the same brush that I did a lot of my background or my leaves with. And the reason I pointed that out is I'm now starting to paint the little squirrel. I tend to use a little bit of a larger brush, but then I know how to use maybe the corner of it, or maybe I'm just putting down the base color, and that's what I'm doing here. So I put down a base color with a larger brush, and then I start adding the detail. My detail brush, I have 2 or 3 I guess, but I primarily use a size 0. That is small, and it doesn't hold hardly any paint. So I have to keep constantly dipping back into the paint. It's kind of a pain. You can't paint quickly. And so I find that I can put down a lot more paint quickly with a larger brush. I just move my brush at little tiny increments, and it takes more time that way, but I have pretty good control. So you'll see me moving back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Right now what I'm doing is I'm adding some, I've already added the first layer, which was yellow ochre and a lot of water, just to figure out my shape. Then I added a little bit more burnt sienna to the yellow ochre, and I think this is like my third or fourth layer. I'm glazing layer on top of layer on top of layer. This layer that I just did had a little bit of cobalt in it. That's why it has a little bit of a purplish look. And that purplish look is more for maybe part of the back and the sides of the face, because the top of the face is going to be lighter and the top of the head will be even lighter than that. For the gingerbread cookie, oh my gingerbread man, it is completely burnt sienna, just straight. I will add different colors later. When you paint, don't just paint one color down. I'm doing for a base layer, I'll do one color. But my next color, I'll add maybe a different tone a little bit. Maybe I might add a little more yellow ochre to the burnt sienna, or maybe even cobalt blue to the burnt sienna, just to add different color. And that means if you're just glazing with the same color on top, you're not going to have interest and depth. But if you put different colors on top, then you're going to start having, the eye will pick up that, it's reading music. This is like sheet music. The eye will see those colors. The brain will tell you it's beautiful because of those colors. I think it's just cute. It's Christmas time. I love gingerbread cookies, gingerbread men cookies. Oh, they're so good with the molasses in them. And I swear, squirrels have got to love them too. So these little squirrels, let them eat them. Notice as I'm painting this gingerbread cookie, I am trying, this is called negative painting. I am painting the gingerbread cookie behind that little sprig of pine needles, and I kind of painted around the sprig just to make it look like the cookie is really behind. It's negative painting, and I used negative painting quite a bit. It's a little bit tricky sometimes, but if you paint around a shape, you create a shape. And that's, I guess you could have another movie or another video for that one. I'm not going to explain that today. So I just put on another layer of burnt sienna on top of the cookies, and now I added a little bit of cobalt blue to the burnt sienna, and I'm adding a shadow. And the shadows on those gingerbread now make them look like they're 3D. So we've zoomed in and we're looking at little mischievous squirrel, number 1. And I'm using my size 0 brush, the brush that is so fine that it doesn't hold any paint, and I have to constantly dip and dip and dip. But I can also get really fine detail. So what I'm doing here is getting that little muzzle. It's really small. I'm getting that little muzzle on that squirrel, looking kind of good, I guess. I've put down yellow ochre underneath, and then I started adding burnt sienna as glazes on top of the fur, and there's multiple layers there. The eyes I just painted in are cobalt blue and burnt sienna. I can get a pretty dark color with those. I did not get as dark as I wanted. If I want to get them a little darker, I can add a touch of the carmine, and that goes into a pretty dark color. I'm now adding a little bit of white to the back, and this might seem ridiculous, but if you are trying to lighten an area, Add white, smooth it out depending on the textures you want. I left it kind of rough there. And then glaze a color lightly over it to make it the color you want. So I'm going to, in a minute, glaze a little bit of yellow ochre over that. I'm putting a lot of detail on the face. Honestly, the face is where the personality of any kind of human or animal is. And so if you can have expressive eyes and maybe mouth also, or nose, or just something about the expression, if you can put it in the eyes and the position of the head, you can really convey a lot of emotion in your picture. And this is how I like to paint. I like animals that have expression. Okay, time to paint little Mr. Squirrel number 2. The one that's the innocent one. The one that hasn't eaten the gingerbread cookies yet. So this is a mixture of yellow ochre and maybe a little bit of titanium white. Not much, because the titanium is a little bit opaque, and right now I'm just trying to put down the idea of where I'm going to be painting. I have to move slowly as I'm painting those sketches because I put my carbon outline or sketch really lightly. I don't like to have a line later, and once you paint some acrylic on top, maybe, I don't know for sure, but maybe the carbon stays there. It could be glazed on. So I don't want those lines on my paper or on my canvas. And so I just put it really lightly. And so right now I'm kind of experimenting where I want that shadow, where I want the outline of the squirrel. I'm also adjusting that line too as I go. You'll see me change the nose in a minute because I realize the nose isn't quite right for a squirrel. And you know, a lot of times we think we have our outline or our sketch pretty good, but once you start putting color on it and you start figuring out where you put your shadows, then you realize, oh my goodness, I am maybe a couple millimeters off, or I could be like an inch off. And you can see it much more pronounced after you have colored your picture or shaded your picture. So again, what I'm doing is I put in that very, very light glaze of yellow ochre just to figure out, where the ultimate shapes were. And then I started adding a little burnt sienna to the yellow ochre and glazing over that. And that's why it goes from kind of a yellow to a little bit of a yellow red. Later it'll be, some areas will be much more pronounced with brown, red brown. I'm now adding a little bit more of the cobalt blue to the burnt sienna just to create a shadow, just to heighten the colors. And I was waiting for little Mr. Squirrel number 2 to dry a little bit, because otherwise you're painting wet on wet on wet, and if you keep doing that, my canvas is really smooth. So if I keep painting when it's so wet and it's starting to dry, I'm going to start lifting paint. So I just didn't want to sit there and wait, so I started painting another area. I would love to paint just this guy alone. He's so cute with his little mouth hanging open. Okay, now I'm adding a little bit of white to his, the muzzle. And pushing some of that white back. This is a really damp paintbrush. And I push some of that white back. And now I'm glazing ever so slightly with some burnt sienna on top of the white. And this is me readjusting the shape of that nose. I took some white, and you can see with the background, it was very easy for me to readjust the shape because I don't have any like wood grain in the background right behind the nose. So I just took white, it blended in really well, and painted around the nose just to recreate the shape a little bit. And I did that a little bit under the lower lip. This is some burnt sienna. It gives it, if this is a red squirrel, which I don't think it's going to be a red squirrel, but anyway, I want to give it a reddish glow. It's just more positive, and it adds more contrast to the painting. And it pops against that light background. And this is what we have to think about. The lower lip also, I painted a dark brown, or not so dark, but like a burnt sienna, and it really shows up well against the white background. And that's why I also had to paint in a little bit of color on the nose, just to distinguish it from the background. Constantly adding a little color, readjusting, and smoothing it out. Looking at his nose right now, I think his face looks a little bit like a polar bear's. I just painted a polar bear. Oh no. And those are the ears. Again, adding some more depth and color. I added a little bit of white just to tone down some of the dark color. Smoothing it out. And just when you thought it was done, I added some more white. And that means I can add some more color on top to get a different color. And I do need to add maybe a little bit more brown, red brown. Here it comes, yeah. Just adding color here and there. I'm almost done. Now on the lower part of the arm, there's going to be a shadow. A shadow will separate the arm from the little squirrel too. And now for one of my favorite parts, painting in the eye. This is where you wake the soul of the animal up. You give it personality. It all depends on the personality you give by the shape of the eye, where you put the shadows in it, where you put the pupil, what kind of eyelid it has. So much. Anyway, I love that part. So now I'm almost done, and I'm realizing I need a little bit more yellow in this because yes, I do have a yellow ochre background, but I want to have a little bit of yellow in the foreground also, just a little bit. So this mixture I think is yellow ochre, and it might have just a little bit of burnt sienna and a little touch of phthalo green, and we're talking such a tiny little bit. Now these leaves I'm painting are phthalo green and yellow ochre. They're bright, cheerful, springy, but they're not overkill. These are the kinds of like extra leaves that just kind of pop, this kind of green pops against some of the darker colors, kind of adds more life to the picture. And I'm using quite a bit of the cobalt blue to make a teal of some of those leaves. And it really adds, I don't know, this is a fresh color. It's great. There's quite a bit of teal here, so I'm still needing a lot of contrast. The squirrel has it. The gingerbread cookies kind of have it, but I need a little bit more. So now I'm adding some small textures, small leaves, and I'm popping some of the teal right in front of the squirrel. This is a darker contrast than the squirrel itself, so it adds interest to the picture by adding a variety of, contrasts. And again, more shapes on top of some of those background figures. Obviously, I am approaching the end of my picture. I can't add a lot more without it getting really busy. So now is the time to sit back a little bit and start contemplating. Have I retained enough white? Do I need to add contrast? Do I need to hype some colors? So maybe add some more textures. There was a little space above the top squirrel that I thought needed a little bit more interest. And now I'm adding the tail. Woohoo! Originally, I planned to put the tail up, like in most pictures when you see the squirrel, it has a raised tail, but it just wasn't going to work in this picture. It doesn't work. So I put in a lot of yellow ochre and, I don't know, maybe a touch of carmine in that too to make it orange. And then I'm adding some layers. I'm adding a little bit of burnt sienna to put in some of the finer hairs. And I think I pretty much got a pretty good match for the squirrel. I'm upping a little bit of the twigs of the wreath. And now it's time to pop the centers of the poinsettias. Until now, I have used 6 colors in this painting, but now I'm adding the 7th. And the 7th is permanent yellow. I need a very bright color for the top layer of this painting, just to pop some final color. And the poinsettia berries are permanent yellow, pure white with just a little bit of the phthalo green. And my painting is done. If you like this, please subscribe, hit the like, and you know what would be even better? Pass it along to somebody who will enjoy painting and having a good Christmas. And I hope to see you again for painting number 4 in my Christmas song personal painting challenge.